Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1408. The topic is nutrition, and the title is The Effects of Effort Without Accuracy. Okay, so what is this one about? So I want to share some examples of, two examples of people who were tracking what they were doing, but they weren't getting results. Therefore, they wanted to make changes. However, when we looked into the details, they were tracking, but they weren't accurate. And that's going to lead to some issues. So I want to talk through those examples, what those issues were, and then we can kind of extrapolate from there. We can all learn some lessons from it. That's kind of the whole idea here. So if we look at this, the first example, the client had nutrition targets. The targets were daily calories of 3,300 to 3,500 for training days, and then 3,000 to 3,200 for non-training days. Don't worry, you won't have to remember this. I just want to give you some background numbers. The daily protein was every day, with the goal was 220 grams. So they had calories they were supposed to hit, protein they were supposed to hit, and then we have a goal of distribution, which means kind of the timing of the calories and the protein throughout the day. So per 5 to 6 hours, so per third of the day. So if you were to divide your waking time of the day into 3 sections, it'd roughly be about 5 to 6 hours per section. There's a first 5 to 6 hours of the day, a second 5 to 6 hours, and then a third 5 to 6 hours. So per 5 to 6 hour unit, they were supposed to eat around like 1,000 to 1,100 calories and around kind of 73 grams of protein. The idea of that is just to give them some subsections of the day that they can kind of see if their numbers are comparing to where by the end of the day they'll be on track. Now, we won't get into all the extra details of that, but distribution is very important. So that is what their targets were and what their goal was. Now, in their journal, they had just kind of randomly sent to me was, I think I'm going to try and reduce my calories by 200. Let me know what you think. I don't think I'm meeting my activity level I originally anticipated. That may change soon, but I really like the feeling I'm getting from the current Beachbody workouts. And I feel like, though, even though I like the workouts, I'm just not burning enough calories for me to lose weight. I just also had my testosterone and cortisone checked, and my testosterone was 429. So this is a male, which makes me think I need to start supplementing. Let me know what you think. The biggest difference on days I miss is lack of preparation and not eating enough early on. So I end up consuming 800 calories before bed. Not good, I don't think. So this is what they wrote. Now, the kind of my thoughts, kind of the takeaways here, was they thought about reducing calories by 200. And my response, kind of in my initial mindset, was, well, it's not really going to matter because the client hasn't been hitting the targets consistently anyhow. So with all my clients, I check in every single week and I look into their tracking information and say, hey, on this day it looks like your calories are good, but your protein was low, or on this day, both were low, both were high. I just kind of give feedback on each individual day. So for all my clients, I already know kind of, what level of consistency they are. So whenever this client reached out and said, hey, I'm going to reduce everything by 200, my initial thought was, well, that doesn't really matter. That's not going to make the difference that you think it will, because we haven't been following everything consistently enough anyhow. And then with test levels being 429, that is low, so that does need to be looked into. And then consuming 800 calories before bed, that kind of depends on what your daily calories are and what the day looked like, and that isn't automatically a bad thing. So we need distribution of our calories and protein to match our activity levels. And the time of the day doesn't matter much. It's more so that we're matching our activity and we're kind of distributing everything out equally. So for somebody who eats 3,000 calories a day, 800 calories before bed might be normal. That might be okay. That might not be the issue. So especially since they haven't been consistent with their daily calories anyhow, the 800 calories before bed, we're splitting hairs here. That's not really the most important thing. So my reply was looking over the data for the past 28 days. So if I look at like a 4-week trend, our calories, the days within the targets have only been 11. So out of the last 28 days, we've only been within our targets 11 days. The days that are under the target is 10. So of the other, of the days we haven't been in target, 17 days, we've been under 10 of those. They were actually never over the targets, and there were 7 days they didn't track anything. So out of 28 days, they had a quarter of it that they didn't track anything. There was no data. And then 10 of the days they were under targets, and 11 of the days they were in targets. So pretty scattered. That's pretty. So from someone who looks at these things all the time, that is very inconsistent. That is very scattered. So the average caloric intake, I actually went through and calculated all this stuff because this is what I do. That's what you're paying me for. So the average caloric intake was 2874. So 2,874, with a high of being 609 over that, and a low of being 764 below that. So we actually have a variance window of 21% above and 26% below. So we have a plus minus of over 20% off our target. That's significant. That's very inconsistent. That's a big window. So, for example, I would love to have clients, if they were doing everything excellent and great, they would be about 10% above or below kind of the initial. So most of my clients, for example, we do a range of calories. So you heard me say that his targets were ranges. They were 33 to 3,500 on training days, 3,000 to 3,200 on training days, non-training days. So we always have ranges. You should never aim for a specific singular number because that's horrendous. You're never going to get it. To eat exactly 3,000 calories every day is bonkers. One day you're going to be 3,002. The next day you're going to be 2,999. You're always going to feel like you're off. So giving yourself ranges feels more successful and it's more realistic. Now, if we look at the individual number, so 33 to 3,500, the actual number we want is 3,400. Now, if I give them an extra 100 over, extra 100 under, that's a pretty narrow scope. That's pretty good. Now, that's less than 10%. That's, less than actually 5% plus or minus. So it is a pretty crisp window, but a lot of clients do this very well. They do very successful, hitting their targets within a 200 to 300 calorie range, regardless of whether they're eating 2,000 calories, 3,000 calories, 4,000 calories. Usually a 200 to 300 calorie range is very realistic. And for the higher caloric intake people, that's less than a 10% variance. So when we say we want to be plus or minus 10, that's a very liberal range. It's very doable, and that's usually somewhere just to start, and then we try to get more refined from there. So for somebody to be plus or minus over 20%, that's very scattered, absolutely very scattered. Their average protein intake was only 181 grams of protein. Now remember, their target was 220. And they had a high low of one day being over by 86 grams, one day being under by 78 grams. So their protein variance was plus 47% and minus 43%. So you have a plus minus of 40%. That's crazy, cray. So what all these numbers show us is our current targets aren't an issue because we're not actually reaching them. So right now, what the person's actually looking like, what their targets would actually look like if we look at what they're doing, is 2,874 average, with a range all the way from 2,100 to 3,400, and a 181 protein average with a range all the way from 103 to 267. Crazy. Big ranges. So bringing the targets down by 200 will have absolutely no effect because we're not even hitting the current targets. So I told them what I think the best thing to do would be is to take the averages we're at, but narrow the variance. So if this client was already eating 2874, but it's a plus minus of 20%, let's try to get that down to 15%. If their average protein intake was 181, but they were at a plus minus of 40%, let's try to get that down to 15%. So that's what I wrote their new numbers to be, was a 15% variance. It's tighter than where they were before, but it's 100% still doable. So now their calorie range is anywhere from 2,400 to 3,300. That's a 900 calorie range. but that's actually narrower than what they've been doing. Their protein now, their new range is 154 to 208. That's big. It's a huge protein range, but it's narrower than where they've been doing. So what I want them to do is to aim for these numbers and then see how they feel. So this is an average of what they're doing, but it hasn't even been what they've been doing because they've been plus or minus 20% on calories and plus or minus 40% on protein. So you might think, well, why are you going to have them do the same thing if they're unhappy, if they're not losing fat? Well, they're not even doing this, really. Like, this is just something in the middle, but they've been scattered everywhere. So what we're trying to do is just say, okay, well, if this is what your habits have been near, let's narrow that down. Let's get some framework around it. Let's get some structure. Let's get some consistency. Let's see how the body responds, and then we'll make some changes. So the client will now follow the new numbers with more accuracy. And then we'll know how the body responds to those numbers and then what changes we can make. So the summary is making changes from what you're not doing won't help. So if you're not doing it and then you say, well, I'm going to do 200 calories less than what I'm not doing. Well, it doesn't matter because you're not going to do the 200 calories less either. So making changes from what you're not doing won't help you. But people do this all the time. They track what they're doing, but they're not actually accurate to what they want to be doing. So another example would be somebody who needed to build up their calories and protein. So they had been under eating. They had, crappy energy, big mood swings, tired and fatigued all the time. Their joints hurt. Their body was fatigued and tired. They weren't recovering from workouts. They weren't losing body fat. So just feeling awful. And it was because they were under eating both calories and protein. So what we wanted to do is we want to rebuild their metabolism to help them with daily energy, help with workout recovery, reduce just joint stress from everyday life activities, and then help build the body's resting caloric use to help with fat loss in the future. So we gave them steps around what this is going to sound like. I streamlined it so it just makes more sense. Stage 1 would have been 14 days. They were supposed to eat between 1,400 to 1,600 calories with 60 to 80 grams of protein. Then if they were adherent to that, like they were accurate, 10 out of 14 days, they were supposed to move to the next stage. They weren't supposed to move until they got 10 out of 14 days right. Stage 2 is 14 days, 1,500 to 1,700 calories, 80 to 100 grams of protein. And again, if they were accurate 10 out of 14 days, they can move to the next stage. Don't move until you're accurate for 10 out of 14 days. Stage 3 is 14 days, 1,600 to 1,800 calories, 100 to 120 grams of protein. The process should have taken 42 days. And this is based on how the body responds metabolism-wise and kind of like the time it takes in which the body's metabolism to reallocate calorie usage. So the 42 days was very on purpose, very purposeful. But by day 22, they reported they've already been on stage 3 and they've gained 5 pounds. They're frustrated and they want to know what they should do. Well, if we look over everything, they only did the first 2 stages for 10 days, not 14 days. In stage 1, they missed every single day for protein and 4 out of the 10 days for calories. In stage 2, they missed 7 out of the 10 days for calories and 2 days for protein. And in the 2 days of stage 2, they already missed 1 of the days for calories. So for the 22 days they were tracking, they were only accurate to their target on 2 days. 2 days out of 22 days, they were accurate. They skipped the stage length recommendations, and they were inaccurate 20 out of 22 days. And now they want to know what changes to make. Well, the response would be changes from what? What are we actually doing? We can't make changes from the recommendations because we didn't follow the recommendations. We only got 2 out of 22 days right. And we didn't follow the timeline. So it's so far off. What would you be making changes from? Like, what do we actually do? So if we remember the first example, making changes from what you're not doing won't help. So we're not even doing what's prescribed. So if we make changes from what we're not doing, what changes? I don't know what changes to make, because what have you been doing? We have to look and see what you've been doing, how that led to the results you're having, and then what changes we can make from there. But we can't change the plan because we haven't been following the plan. The plan isn't the reason why the person's 5 pounds overweight and unhappy. It's whatever they're doing that is causing them to be 5 pounds overweight and unhappy. So changing the plan doesn't matter because they're not even following the plan. So in this kind of scenario, the best advice is to start over. Now that can feel overwhelming and that can feel crushing, soul crushing, but it's not a complete loss. So the person did track. They tracked for 22 days. They did get their protein actually up more consistently than where it was before. So in order for them to track for 22 days in a row, and in order for them to have gotten their protein up, they did improve consistency of habit and food selection. So they did make progress. There is a win from this experience. And that's super important to recognize and remember. Even from our perceived failures, there are often successes. If anything, you learn what you did doesn't work, which is helpful because then hopefully you won't do it again. How many people in our lives do we see do the same thing repeatedly, get the same unwanted result, but they never seem to learn? Well, let's not do that in our own life. So the takeaway from these examples, tracking without accuracy won't get you the results you want. Saying you're doing the plan is a hell of a lot different than actually doing the plan. And making changes from what you're not doing won't help. Don't make changes from what you're doing until you know exactly what you've been doing. If you're not getting the outcome you wanted, make sure you're actually doing what you think you were doing. So I had a gym teacher when I was younger, and he would, if you ever did something that he didn't want you to be doing, he would ask you, what are you doing? And you're like, well, I was thinking I might do this. And he'd go, don't think, just do what I tell you. So that is something we can learn and use, is when in regards to what your plan is, don't think, just do what it tells you. Effort without accuracy will just leave you frustrated. Make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you're not, start over. Kind of go back to square one if you need to. And it's okay if you need to. Remember, it's not a total loss. But you must establish known, consistent efforts to then know what changing from those efforts will actually produce in regards to a predictable outcome. If you change a plan that you're not following, who the hell knows what difference it's going to make? You weren't following it anyhow. If I have a fast horse and I have a slow horse, and I didn't win the race, and I'm like, well, I need to use that fast horse, but I've been walking the whole time. Well, hell, using the slow horse would have been good. So if I have two horses and I want to pick which one I think might win the race, but I'm walking, I'm not even using the damn horses, well, that's not going to help. Picking between the two horses doesn't matter. That's a horrible example, and I have no clue why I thought of that. So I think I just messed up everything. But the point is that, a lot of us, and myself included, we have kind of goals in mind. We have behaviors that we want to be adhering to. I want to eat this way. I want to train this way. I want to be doing life this way. And when we're frustrated and we're like, man, I'm not getting the results I wanted, maybe I should change what I'm doing. We think we need to change the plan. But we first need to check, are we actually following the plan? Changing a plan we're not following won't help us. It's just going to leave you frustrated. So track what you're doing, but also check what you're doing. And make sure it's accurate to what your plan is. Remember, saying you're doing the plan is a lot different than actually doing it. One of my best examples was a lady one time. She was supposed to be dieting for a strength competition, And she hadn't been losing weight, hadn't been feeling good, like energy-wise. And I said, like, what are you doing? Like, are you following the plan? She's like, yeah, I'm following the nutrition plan you wrote. But in the afternoons, I do have a soda. And I'm like, a diet soda? She's no, like normal soda. I'm like, okay. A little bit of a pause. She's, well, like I do eat some snacks at night. Like I do have some candy every now and then. And I was like, well, how often is now and then? And it was like, a couple of days a week. And I'm like, well, like a couple as in 2 or a couple as in 5? She's like, probably more towards the 5. So I was like, okay, so we're following the plan, but we're adding a soda and we're adding candy. But we're following the plan. And she started laughing. And I was like, okay, so you're doing all of what the plan says, but you're just adding the soda and you're adding the candy. And she said, well, I missed a couple meals here and there. And, at this meal you wrote this, but I don't really like that, so I eat this instead. I'm like, okay, so we're following the plan, but we've changed the plan and we've added things to the plan. And she laughed, and I was like, okay, so you get my point here is, we can say we're following the plan, but if you look at what you're actually doing, it looks nothing like the plan. So I said, how about, if we're wondering what we should do next, why don't we just do the plan? So we changed nothing. She lost weight and did great in the competition. And it was like, oh, for the love of God, So that's what I would encourage you to do is if you think you're following your plan but you're not getting the results you want, just make sure you're actually following it. Make sure you're actually following through with the actions you're supposed to be doing. So that way, if you do need to make changes, you know what you're changing from. It's consistent enough that you got you got a response. So now when you make a change, you'll get a predictable outcome from that change. Okay. Well, if you need any help, if there's anything I can do, let me know. If you're not sure if the plan you're following actually is worthwhile or anything, you want me to look it over, just email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. So I encourage you, if you are tracking your efforts, make sure that your efforts are accurate. So double check yourself. Make sure you're actually following what you're supposed to be following. Okay? Hopefully this is a wake-up call for everybody. And I hope you're already doing it great. But just in case, double check just to be sure. Okay? Well, thank you for listening. If you like our podcast and you think it's helpful, please consider sharing it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people can help. That's the whole point of what we're doing this for. We just want to help people live their healthiest and happiest life. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, people who financially support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day. I would love to keep it for free, keep doing it every day because I think it has a huge benefit. So I appreciate the financial support to help cover some of the cost. It does make a difference, so thank you very much. You can consider giving at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. We have an option for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything you can give, greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Also, if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.